Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. Last time on the Arc Review, we visited the prehistoric battleground of Little Garden. And this week, we're taking a trip to a slightly colder climate to examine the winter island of Drum. Drum Island is the 10th story arc in the series, consisting of 25 manga chapters and 14 anime episodes, which is the longest arc to date, but still pretty short in comparison to what's to come. Now, rather cleverly, the Drum Island arc actually begins during the Little Garden arc. At the end of Little Garden, Nami was bitten by a bug which caused her to rapidly develop a high fever and forced the Straw Hats to take a detour to Drum Island in order to find a doctor. So right off the bat, this is a bit annoying because, as I mentioned in the previous arc review, we have a narrative goal to get to, being Alabasta. Little Garden was already a side trip on our way there, and now we have to undergo another arc before getting to the serious stuff. However, at the very least, Little Garden furthered the story by having new Baroque Works agents to deal with. Drum, on the other hand, is a complete break in the story, and apart from Vivi and Karoo's minimal presence, has nothing to do with the Alabasta saga whatsoever. At least that's how I felt the first time around. Much like Little Garden, I believe that the Drum arc benefits hugely from reading it in retrospect, allowing us to enjoy the arc for what it really is. And what Drum Island is quite a unique arc actually. It separates itself from most arcs by not really placing too much focus on the conflict between the Straw Hats and the main antagonist, who in this case happens to be Wapol. Sure, Wapol is ever present, but until the end of the arc he's very much a subplot. Instead, the key conflict of this arc is more about the Straw Hats versus the actual environment of Drum, which I think is a really nice change because it quite proficiently conveys the danger of the islands in the Grand Line rather than just the sea itself. In fact, one of the most memorable moments of the entire arc is when Luffy is climbing up to Kureha's castle carrying both Nami and Sanji, who at this point both need desperate medical attention. He free climbs the entire mountain in freezing cold temperatures, and by the end of it his hands and feet are bleeding. It's a really powerful sequence that shows just how far Luffy will go for his crew. It also happens to be another moment where I'll say the anime did a much better job than the manga. The anime very effectively conveys just how brutal and difficult this climb really is, primarily by building up an atmospheric soundscape. Everything from the snow blowing to Luffy's muffled noises of struggle to the background music all contribute to this epic struggle in a way that the manga just couldn't convey. As for the main event, this arc introduces us to the ever-lovable Tony Chopper, a reindeer who ate a human Zoan-type devil fruit. And although he seems very much like your typical mascot character at first, Chopper actually has one of the saddest and most touching backstories in the entire series. His struggle to save his only friend in the world, Dr. Hirolook, is downright painful to read and watch, but incredibly heartwarming at the same time. Hirolook himself is also a wonderfully crafted character. I love the idea of a man who desperately wants to help the world, but just doesn't have the required ability to do so. But he keeps persisting, and it's a very admirable struggle, even if he doesn't succeed in his lifetime. In the end, his legacy is passed on to Chopper, and despite his many failures in life, Hirolook becomes a somewhat legendary figure in my mind. It's the idea of inherited will, and this concept is a huge part of One Piece in general. Each of the Straw Hats are subject to inherited will in one way or another, and the characters who made up their past really do inform who they are today. And this inherited will is particularly clear in Chopper. Actually, come to think of it, Drum Island is a very Straw Hat light arc in the series. The only person who really has a huge active role is Luffy. I mean, Sanji also gets a bit of time to shine, but quickly succumbs to the power of an avalanche, and as for everyone else, Nami has been struck down with a fever and is unable to do anything during the arc. Usopp spends most of his time just kind of standing around with Vivi, and Zoro just strips down and gets lost in the snow. That's pretty much it for the crew. But I think it's a huge credit to the series that this arc can be built with fairly minimal involvement from our protagonists and really narrow the focus of the story onto Chopper. Unfortunately, the island of Drum itself is not one of my favorites. I think it's probably the most visually boring island we've been to in the Grand Line and the New World, and a lot of that probably stems from the fact that it is a winter island and everything needs to be covered in white by necessity. Fortunately, we do have a bit of trademark Oda craziness in terms of the native animals of the island, all of which I love, especially the hiking bear. Getting into a bit more detail on the villains, Wapol, as mentioned before, is relegated to a side character really, which is great because he's a pretty weak villain and and never for a single moment to be taken seriously. He does have a fascinating devil fruit power, but really this guy is just a literal joke villain, which was probably much needed to contrast Chopper's story, which is incredibly somber and depressing. Unfortunately, as a result, I really didn't care for Wapol until he left the story and began his own cover series, which admittedly was pretty cool. Now here's a character I always forget actually exists, Dalton. I can't say I have any strong feelings about him one way or the other, but despite him being present from beginning to end, I feel like we never really got to know him or his abilities all that well. And fun fact, Dalton is actually the very first Zoan Devil Fruit user we encounter in the series, and I would honestly love to see more of his Bison Fruit. I feel like becoming an Oxman is a significantly stronger power than Dalton really shows off. But oh well, I guess. This was really the birth of Zoan fruits in the series, so Oda was probably much less creative with them at this stage. We also can't escape Drum without mentioning the amazing Dr. Kureha. Aside from Chopper, this sassy young woman is probably my favourite character introduced during the arc. Her fashion sense is 100% spot on, and her eccentric personality brightens up every scene she just so happens to be in. Plus, she smacked the crap out of Sanji, which was really funny. Finally, the Drum Island arc reveals a lot of very poignant information about the One Piece world at large. Firstly, it was during this arc that we were afforded a glimpse of the previous reverie that occurred, which is highly relevant today given that we are just about to enter another. Also, Drum Island was the first arc that revealed Gold D. Roger's proper name, as well as the will of D in general. Prior to that, he'd just been known as Gold Roger in the series. And of course, this arc introduced us in name to the Blackbeard Pirates, who would go on to have an exceptionally sinister presence in the story. But that pretty much does it for Drum Island. Next week on the Arc Review, we'll be heading into a full-scale war as we finally deliver Princess Vivi to her home of Alabasta and get ready to take on a Warlord of the Sea. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like, favorite, or subscribe, and please do comment with your thoughts on Drum Island. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.